Hello, everybody. It's Sil, the DM, here with this week's recap for my Ixalan D&D session. This is going to be another fairly short video. We got off to a late start due to several players being sick and or out of town, and uh, a lot of it was taken up by where we left off last time. Um, so, to bring up where we left off last time, the party had just engaged a vampire, a Legion uh, soldier, it looked like, from the Legion of Dusk. And continuing with their surprise round, none of them managed to put a scratch on the vampire in this first little surprise. To which the vampire opened up with a fireball right into the heart of the group that was all sort of huddled together while hiding. This dropped two of the NPCs instantly and took Bardov, the orc NPC, down to one hit point. Um, Ernesto was dropped unconscious, and Orson ended up losing an arm and almost dying. Most of the players ended up getting hurt pretty hard as well, some of them dropping to half health in the first round. However, Shura and Osaha had taken cover beneath the water, diving into the river, as Shura had prepared a reaction to any sort of big AoE spell, thinking that the opponent might throw something like that. Upon which the fight started, and it didn't last a very long while. A lot of the party was very far away from the vampire, taking shots with their bows and dealing a very small amount of damage when they could. Famine was definitely very effective at hurling spells across the river, dealing a good bit of damage in their own right. While Shura, Osaha, and Federico tried to make their way across the river and use what spells and abilities they had available to them. But this, of course, meant that the vampire was able to get a few rounds of decent offense in particular, once it began blade singing, its AC was really heavily boosted, getting to add its intelligence modifier to its armor class while singing, and getting a huge boost to its fly speed. During which it managed to drain a bit of health out of Osaha and deliver some pretty brutal cuts to Shura, using its shield spell to try and reduce incoming damage as much as possible. However, it was definitely taking hits. And while this was happening, Alani was busy healing and tending to the NPCs and trying to help Bardov break out, for he'd been sort of like buried in mud to try and hide himself, which in the fireball had hardened into a thick clay. Um, and wanting to make sure that the NPCs didn't die, Alani was busy sort of running triage and throwing healing words around where they could. Uh, During the fight, Shura called out to the vampire a few times. Nothing that anyone nearby him could hear, and the one time Osaha was close enough to pick up what was being said, it was in a language he didn't understand. But the vampire didn't seem ready to accept it. After about 4 rounds of combat, however, it was very clear that the vampire was just outnumbered. Um, and getting pretty hurt. They were getting lucky enough to get through the very high AC more often than they weren't. And the vampire, though extremely mobile, uh, was quickly running out of resources, having blown several charges of their luck feat and most of their spell slots already. It had been saving a few spell slots, though, for a second large fireball to potentially wipe out a large cluster of enemies, or potentially to thunderstep or dimension door away. And after Shura called out to them again in a language that no one around him understood, the vampire lady, this heavily armored, extremely skilled combatant who was getting pretty close to dead, uh, decided that it was time to run for now. And it was a pretty hard decision. It was very clear that the decision and the fact that she had been pushed to a wall by these pirates was really pissing her off. Um, in fact, before she teleported away, Osaha noticed an odd reaction to her body, where her eyes sort of flashed with light and her body shimmered, going almost translucent before sort of relocking itself into place. Shura, this time recognizing the teleportation spell, managed to use his reaction to suppress his aura uh, of imprisonment, ethereal prison, which is a subclass feature for his homebrew warlock subclass. And she was able to teleport away. Though it hurt him quite a bit, uh, for about 7 force damage, I think it was, to suppress the aura, dropping him below bloodied again. Shura and Osa made their way back to the other side of the river, and Alani quickly performed a prayer of healing. At which point, Orson was kind of freaking out since he woke up missing his left arm, which was his writing arm, and as the scribe's apprentice, this could potentially pose problems for him, unless he really just sits down and learns to write with his right hand. Uh, However, Shira wanted to make sure that once everyone was healed up enough that they could move, that they did move. Thankfully, the initial fireball had not damaged their rowboats, and they pulled them together and got them back into the water and began pushing back upstream. Eventually coming to this large clearing where it had been clear to them now that they had been pushing their way up a very gentle slope that was just many, many miles long, so that even though it was a very gentle incline, they were steadily getting higher and higher above sea level. Now, on either side, there were large cliffs separating them from the rest of the island, and before them was the temple, the shrine that they were expecting from the map, with these large 4 pillars around this very Aztec-style pyramid. The pillars themselves were wrapped in these stone snakes that seemed to almost be biting at each other, forming a natural archway above the staircases. And I noticed that the particular branch of the river they were on seemed to be stemming from this temple, running down its stairs and creating this river they were rowing on. Setting their boats aside and not so amazingly hiding them beneath some brush, the group started the long climb up the 450 feet worth of temple. Eventually getting to the top where they discovered the entryway is a very large sort of open section at the top of the Aztec temple. Getting inside, they realized that it was basically like a balcony area on either side with stairs going down in opposite directions, leading to what appeared to be more of a main prayer area beneath. However, at this point, the party was starting to get pretty exhausted, and they said that they needed to take a short rest, just in case there was something lingering below in the temple area. So they did take a short rest, and Osaha did the Song of Rest, or flavored as a dance of rest, or performance, while everyone else took a moment and took a breather, while Shura went out and stayed on watch. During this time, Alani did a little bit of digging around and could see some things, but nothing very important. It was very clear that because this area was open to the elements and the fact that water was being shot out of it like a cannon constantly, that there was, if there was anything here, it's long since been water damaged to oblivion. Finishing their short rest, they went downstairs and discovered a large prayer area with many large pews, each with 10 feet of space between them, as if large creatures could get between them for ceremonies. A raised dais, and behind that a statue of this massive 2-armed snake creature. But each part of its body, instead of being just solid flesh, uh, looked like it was just comprised of snakes, its hands ending in these 5 long snake heads instead of fingers, and its head itself, the main head of the body, being this massive sort of cobra-esque head. A little more digging around, and Osaha and Alani remembered a small curio shop from High and Dry, a small ship that was not too far away from their mother's tavern, where they had learned of several taboo or ancient and unknown religions, and that they had learned about sort of these snake people possibly worshipping a figure that looked like this, a great serpent, a gold-plated serpent. And they learned that they knew that in the lore of this religion, the serpent was like a hunter god, a predator god. Um, it was responsible in this religion for the moving movements of the sun, and Alani knew two different variations of the myth. One was that it would move the sun to the day to help the predators that needed daylight to hunt, and then it would push the sun down so that the predators that were nocturnal could have their time to thrive. However, there was a different variation of the myth where the golden serpent itself was tracing the sun. It was trying to consume the sun, as if the sun was its prey, and the sun and the day night cycle was merely the sun trying to flee the serpent. And during all of this, they discovered that the other half of this large open area, a full like 120 feet wide, with the prey area on one half of the waterfall and or geyser, I suppose is a more accurate word, and the other half, the other 60 feet, was just completely destroyed and rummaged furniture. There were a few old ceramics that had been shattered, and a lot of effigies that looked like they were gold plated at one point, but it had all been stripped bare. And the party was, especially the NPCs and the crew, were getting very disheartened that there was a good chance that nothing was here, and that anything that was here had been taken already. At which point, Shura said that he could perform a ritual that would let him figure out if anything was going on. But it would take him an hour to do it, to see if there was more here, because he knew that given the size of the temple, they definitely weren't. They definitely hadn't seen all of the temple. There had to be more somewhere, but no one could quite figure out how or where to access it. Agreeing to this, the group gave Shura some space, Bardov taking up a watch on the stairwell, on one of the stairwells, Federico and Alesta lingering towards the other. Um, at this point, Famine's player, who has been quite sick recently, had gone back to sleep, because he just couldn't stay up anymore. And Alani and Osa took this time to sort of just interrogate each other about recent occurrences. Alani's seeming attraction to Bardov, and Osaha's connections with Shura. And while this was all happening, Pelennor spoke with Mikhail, curious about more of the Empire, the Sun Empire's treatment of dinosaurs, particularly the nests where they're born and raised. And Mikhail shared a little bit more information, but nothing too ultimately revealing. And at the end of Shura's ritual, after an hour, he opened his eye, and there was this sort of pulse of energy from him, as he activated the other part of his subclass, which allows him to connect to ancient ruins or artifacts, a place or an object, to feel and see a part of its history. He can't really control it, but it sort of gives him like divination visions, like a first-person video game. He sort of possesses a memory of the item, something that's touched it. And when he reawoken from his ritual, he discovered that there was a secret entrance leading down below, and quickly went over to the large serpent statue and pulled the right snake hidden inside of it, that would raise it up into an archway and a spiral staircase leading down, to where they saw the low orange glow of torchlight and the soft yellow glow of twinkling gold. And that's where we ended the session. Again, we started an hour later than normal. We got into some or not heated, just some active discussion during which was a little distracting about a few things. One of which was the NPCs, because the party was interested with how I was making the NPCs and giving them abilities and whatnot. And I explained that I have a system of NPC classes, where the NPCs have their own hit die, their own proficiency scores, um, their own skill sets and their own class feats, but they're just extremely suboptimal for combat. They're more specifically tied to a very specific ideal, and it was just a fun conversation of how I run my NPCs and how I design them as characters. Because some of the NPCs have like levels in sailor, and some of them have levels in poet or scribe or carpenter, and we got a little sidetracked, and it ate up a bit of our time. However, we'll be diving down into the depths of this temple on the next session, and I'm hoping that all our players will be there and in tip-top shape. If you have any questions about the session, please leave them in the comments below. Comments, likes, subscribe, and share with your friends. It's all greatly appreciated if you're enjoying our journey here in Ixalan, and I'll see you all next time.